People often tell you that silence is peaceful. They say you should enjoy the quiet after a long life of working and raising children. They are wrong. Silence is not peaceful. Silence is heavy. It has a physical weight, like a wet wool blanket draped over your shoulders that you can never quite shake off. It presses down on your chest when you wake up in the morning, and it sits at the foot of your bed when you try to sleep at night. For 20 years, that silence has been my only roommate. It isn't the silence of an empty house. It is the silence of a phone that never rings. It is the silence of a mailbox that only contains bills. It is the silence of a daughter who decided 2 decades ago that I simply did not exist anymore. Have you ever poured love into a bucket with a hole in the bottom? You keep pouring and pouring, giving everything you have, exhausting yourself, hoping that eventually the bucket will fill up. But it never does. It just drains away, disappearing into the ground without leaving a trace. If you know that feeling, the specific, sharp pain of loving someone who refuses to see you, then please subscribe to this channel. I am sharing my story because I know I am not the only one, and we need to know we aren't invisible. My name is Sheila Bradford. I am 70 years old, and I spent my career as a logistics manager here in Chicago. My job was all about tracking things. I made sure shipments went from point A to point B without getting lost. I managed inventory. I balanced books. I knew where every single crate was at any given second. Maybe that is why I handled my daughter's absence the way I did. I couldn't control her leaving, so I tracked what I could. I tracked the cost. I don't mean I kept a score, because I wanted my money back. I kept a ledger, because it was the only proof I had that I was still her mother. When she stopped talking to me, I didn't stop being her provider. I just had to do it from the shadows. I remember the day I found out she had fractured her ankle. This was about 5 years into the silence. I hadn't been blocked on social media yet, so I saw a photo of her on crutches. She was working as an unpaid intern at a small agency then, and I knew she didn't have health insurance. I knew she was on her feet all day. I didn't call her because I knew she wouldn't answer. Instead, I did the research. I found the best orthopedic support shoes on the market. They were specialized, designed for recovery. They cost me $400. That was a lot of money for me. I was already retired, living on a pension that hadn't been adjusted for inflation in years. $400 was my heating bill for the winter, but I didn't hesitate. I ordered them. I had them shipped to her apartment. I tracked the package number every hour until I saw the notification. Delivered. 2 weeks later, a box appeared on my doorstep. It was the shoes. The tape hadn't even been cut. She hadn't opened the box to look at them. She saw my name on the return address, or maybe she just knew. She marked it return to sender. She spent money on postage just to make sure I knew she didn't want my help. That $400 sat in my hallway for a month before I could bring myself to return them. Then there was the apartment. That was earlier, right after she graduated. She was trying to get her first place in the city. I still had friends in real estate, and one of them called me. He told me a young woman named Aurora Weeks was applying for a studio, but her credit score was too thin. The landlord was going to reject her. I drove to the leasing office that afternoon. I walked in and asked to speak to the landlord privately. I wrote a check for $1,200. It was the security deposit plus the first month's rent. I told the landlord to never tell her. I told him to say he made an exception or that he waived the deposit. I just wanted her to have a safe place to live. She got the apartment. She never knew I was the reason she wasn't sleeping on a friend's couch. For years, I drove past that building, looking up at the third-floor window, knowing my money was the reason those lights were on. That $1,200 was a secret I kept to myself, a little deposit of love she couldn't return because she didn't know it existed. But the hardest one was the savings bonds. Every month, for 20 years, I bought a $50 savings bond in her name. $50 doesn't sound like much to some people, but when you are living on a fixed income in Chicago, $50 is a choice. It is a choice between fresh vegetables and canned soup. It is a choice between turning up the thermostat or wearing 2 sweaters. I remember one year my back molar cracked. The dentist told me I needed a crown. It was going to cost $800 out of pocket. I didn't have it. I sat in my car in the parking lot, my jaw throbbing, holding an ice pack to my cheek. It was the first of the month. I had to buy the bond. If I paid for the crown, I would miss 4 months of bonds for Aurora. I didn't fix the tooth. I had the dentist pull it instead. It was cheaper. I walked around with a gap in my smile for the rest of my life, but I bought the bond. I put it in the fireproof box with the others. Over 20 years, those $50 payments added up to over $12,000 plus interest. It was my safety net for her. I imagined that one day she would come back, maybe in trouble, maybe needing help, and I would hand her this box. I would show her that even when she forgot me, I was saving for her. I look around my apartment now. It is small. The windows are old, and when the wind blows off Lake Michigan, the curtains move even when the windows are closed. The walls are covered in frames, but the photos are old. There is Aurora at age 7, missing her front teeth. Aurora at 10, winning the spelling bee. Aurora at 16, in her prom dress, just before she stopped looking at me with love and started looking at me with contempt. There are no photos of her at 20 or 30 or 40, just the frozen images of a child who doesn't exist anymore. This morning, the rhythm of my silence was broken. I went downstairs to check the mail, expecting the usual flyers and utility bills. Instead, I found an envelope. It wasn't a standard envelope. It was thick, creamy cardstock. It had weight to it. My name, Sheila Bradford, was written in professional calligraphy in gold ink. My heart hammered against my ribs. For a split second, I thought maybe she is getting married. Maybe she had a baby. Maybe she finally wants me. I took the elevator up to my floor, my hands shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice trying to open my door. I sat at my kitchen table, pushed aside my cup of lukewarm tea, and used a butter knife to slit the envelope open. I didn't want to rip it. It felt too precious. I pulled out the card. It was heavy, textured, expensive. You are cordially invited to the exclusive launch gala of Week's Public Relations. It wasn't a wedding. It wasn't a christening. It wasn't a handwritten letter saying, "I'm sorry, Mom." 2. It was a business invitation. I read the details. It was being held at one of the most expensive hotels in downtown Chicago. The dress code was black tie. The ticket price for the general public was $500 a plate, but this invitation was complimentary. I sat there, staring at the gold foil letters. After 20 years of returned packages and blocked calls, she sends me this. It felt cold. It felt impersonal. But then a desperate, pathetic thought crept into my mind. She invited me. She didn't have to. She could have let me rot in silence forever, but she put my name on a list. She had someone write it out. She paid for the stamp. Maybe this was her way. Maybe she was too proud to call, so she was using her success to build a bridge. Maybe she wanted me to see what she had built. Maybe she wanted her mother there to see her shine. I looked at the date. It was this Saturday. I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror. My hair was gray and pulled back in a severe bun. My cardigan was worn at the elbows. I didn't look like a woman who belonged at a black tie gala. I looked like a woman who pulled her own teeth to save $50. But I wasn't going to miss it. If this was the door opening, even just a crack, I was going to walk through it. I didn't know then that I wasn't being invited as a mother. I was being invited as a prop. I didn't know that the silence wasn't ending. It was just about to get much louder. I spent the next 3 days living in a state of anxious delirium. I read that invitation. So many times the gold ink started to flake off where my thumb rubbed against it. I analyzed every curve of the letters. Why now? Why a gala? Maybe she wanted to show me off. Maybe she realized that success feels hollow if you don't have anyone to share it with. But if I was going to walk into my daughter's world, I couldn't look like the woman I had become. I couldn't look like a pensioner who clipped coupons and kept the thermostat at 62 degrees. I had to look like the mother she remembered. I had to look like I belonged. I went to a boutique on Michigan Avenue. I usually shop at thrift stores or wait for the clearance rack at department stores, but this was different. I found a dress on a mannequin. It was sapphire blue, made of a heavy silk blend that hid the softness of my age. It had long sleeves and a modest neckline, dignified and elegant. I looked at the price tag, $350. I stood there holding the fabric, doing the math in my head. My monthly grocery budget was exactly $350. If I bought this dress, I wasn't just spending disposable income. I was spending my meals. I was trading fresh produce, meat, and coffee for oatmeal and toast for the next 30 days. I didn't even blink. I took it to the register. I handed over my debit card, knowing it would drain my checking account down to double digits until the first of the month. I told myself it was an investment. You don't show up to your daughter's coronation in rags. I bought a pair of low heels and a tube of lipstick in a shade called Dusty Rose. I wanted to be perfect. Saturday arrived with a bitter wind coming off the lake. In Chicago, we call it the hawk because it cuts right through you. I got dressed in my small bathroom, careful not to smudge my makeup. I put on the blue dress. For the first time in 20 years, I looked in the mirror and saw a woman who had value. I stood tall. I put on my coat, a wool blend that had seen better days, but I planned to check it at the coat room immediately. I had planned to take a taxi. I wanted to arrive at the door of the Palmer House Hilton like a guest of honor. But after buying the dress, I checked my balance. A cab from my neighborhood to downtown would cost $40 with tip. I didn't have it, not if I wanted to eat anything other than tap water next week. So I walked to the bus stop. The wind was brutal. I huddled in the shelter, clutching my purse to my chest, praying the bus would be on time, so my hair wouldn't be ruined. When it arrived, it was crowded. I stood for 40 minutes, holding onto the metal pole, trying to keep my dress from brushing against the wet floor. I got off 4 blocks away from the hotel, because the bus didn't go right to the door. I walked the last 4 blocks against the wind. My feet started to ache in the new heels. My eyes watered from the cold. By the time I saw the golden awning of the Palmer House, I was shivering, but I forced myself to stop a few yards away. I wiped my eyes. I pinched my cheeks to bring some color back. I took a deep breath. Showtime, Sheila. I pushed through the revolving doors, and the silence of the city was replaced by the hum of wealth. The lobby smelled of expensive lilies and old money. Chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling. Everyone looked golden. The men were in tuxedos, the women in gowns that sparkled under the lights. I handed my old coat to the attendant, hoping she wouldn't notice the frayed lining. Then I turned toward the ballroom. That's when I saw her. Aurora was standing near the entrance, greeting guests. My breath caught in my throat. She was breathtaking. She wore a silver gown that fit her like a second skin, looking every inch the CEO she claimed to be. Her hair was styled in sleek waves. She was laughing at something a man next to her was saying. She looked confident. She looked powerful. She looked nothing like the little girl who used to cry when it thundered. I felt a surge of pride, so strong it almost knocked me over. I did that, I thought. I kept her safe. I paid for that apartment. I bought those bonds. I made sure she survived, so she could thrive. I started walking toward her. My heart was hammering a rhythm against my ribs. Daughter, daughter, daughter. I was 10 feet away when she turned her head and saw me. The smile didn't just fade from her face. It vanished. She froze. It wasn't the look of a daughter seeing her mother. It was the look of a deer seeing a hunter. It was panic. She stiffened, her eyes darting left and right to see if anyone else had noticed me. Aurora, I said, my voice trembling slightly. I reached out my hands. I wanted to hug her. I wanted to feel her arms around me after 20 years of empty air. She didn't move toward me. She took a half step back. What are you doing here? She hissed. It was a whisper, but it landed like a slap. I got the invitation. I stammered, confused. The card. You sent it. Before she could answer, the man she had been talking to turned around. He was handsome, polished, with a smile that looked expensive. Is this a friend, Aurora? He asked, extending a hand toward me. This was the moment. This was the moment she could say, yes, Julian, this is my mother. This is the woman who raised me. Aurora cleared her throat. She wouldn't look me in the eye. She looked at a spot somewhere over my left shoulder. Julian, this is Sheila, she said, her voice flat and devoid of warmth. She's a distant relative. From the old neighborhood. I haven't seen her in years. A distant relative. The words hit me harder than the Chicago wind. Not mom. Not mother. A distant relative. Like a second cousin twice removed that you only see at funerals. I stood there, my hand half extended, feeling the sapphire dress turn into a costume. I wasn't a guest of honor. I was a ghost she hadn't managed to exorcise. Pleasure to meet you, Sheila, Julian said, oblivious to the fact that my heart was breaking in real time. So, kind of you to come out to support Aurora. Yes, I managed to say. My voice sounded hollow to my own ears. So kind. Aurora grabbed my elbow. Her grip was tight, bordering on painful. Why don't you go find your seat, she said, steering me away from the entrance and away from the important people. The servers will help you. She signaled a young woman with a clipboard. Please show Show Sheila to her table. She turned her back on me immediately, laughing too loudly at something Julian said, erasing me from the conversation before I had even left the circle. I followed the hostess into the ballroom. It was magnificent, filled with round tables draped in heavy white linens, centered with towering floral arrangements. We walked past the stage. We walked past the tables in the front row, labeled with numbers like 1, 2, and 3. We kept walking. We walked past the middle section. We walked past the back section. The hostess didn't stop until we reached the very edge of the room, right next to the swinging double doors of the catering kitchen. Every time the doors opened, the clatter of dishes and the smell of industrial dish soap wafted out. Here we are, the hostess said with a polite, pitying smile. Table 42. Table 42. The overflow table. The table they set up last minute when they realized they invited more people than the room could comfortably hold. There was no floral arrangement here, just a small candle. I sat down. The other chairs were filled, but not with investors or family. To my left was a young intern who was texting under the table. To my right was a couple who clearly didn't know Aurora well. They were complaining about the parking validation. Who are you here for? The woman asked me, buttering a roll, without looking up. I'm Aurora's mother. I wanted to say, I'm the reason she exists. I'm a distant relative, I whispered instead. I sat there in my $350 dress, shivering every time the kitchen doors swung open, watching my daughter across the room. She was at table 1, shining under the spotlight. I realized then that I hadn't been invited to share in her glory. I was hidden in the shadows, just close enough to see what I couldn't have, but far enough away that I wouldn't ruin the aesthetic. But I was wrong about why I was there. I thought I was just a seat filler. I didn't know yet that table 42 wasn't just a bad seat. It was a trap, and the jaws were about to snap shut. Have you ever felt completely alone in a room full of people? You are surrounded by noise, laughter, and the clinking of glasses, but you might as well be on the moon because nobody is really seeing you. If you know that feeling, if you've ever been the invisible person at the table, please hit the like button on this video. Let's show the algorithm, and maybe even show Sheila that she isn't invisible to us. Dinner was a blur of activity that didn't involve me. Waiters in white gloves placed plates of filet mignon and asparagus in front of us, moving with efficient silence. I picked up my fork, but my hand felt heavy. I couldn't eat. My stomach was twisted into a knot so tight it hurt to breathe. From table 42, I had a direct line of sight to table 1, the center of the universe for tonight. I watched Aurora work the room. She was masterful. She moved from investor to investor, touching an arm here, laughing at a joke there. She looked radiant. Every time she laughed, I felt a phantom memory of her giggling as a toddler, and it clashed violently with the cold, professional woman I saw now. I saw her whisper something to Julian, her business partner. He nodded and checked his watch. Around 9 o'clock, the lights in the ballroom dimmed. The hum of conversation died down as Julian walked up to the small stage at the front of the room. He tapped the microphone twice. Thump, thump, and the sound echoed through the speakers. "Good evening, everyone," Julian said, his voice smooth and commanding. "Thank you all for being here to witness the birth of Week's Public Relations. Tonight isn't just about business. It's about legacy. It's about the people who stand behind us, pushing us toward greatness. Legacy. That word hung in the air. I shifted in my seat. Was he talking about me? A tiny, foolish spark of hope ignited in my chest again. Maybe this was it. Maybe the distant relative comment was just a misunderstanding, a joke I didn't get. Maybe they were about to acknowledge that I was the legacy. To tell you more about her vision, Julian continued, "Please welcome the CEO of Weeks PR, Aurora Weeks." The applause was polite but enthusiastic. Aurora glided up the stairs to the stage. She adjusted the microphone stand, took a dramatic pause, and looked out over the crowd. Her eyes scanned the room, but they didn't land on table 42. "Not yet. Thank you, Julian," she began. Her voice was thick with emotion, trembling just enough to sound sincere. You know, people see the success, but they don't see the struggle. They don't see the long nights. They don't see the sacrifices. She wiped a tear from her eye. The room was captivated. I watched her, mesmerized. She was telling a story of hardship, of pulling herself up by her bootstraps. But something felt off. She was talking about struggle, but she had never really struggled. I had struggled for her. I was the bumper that took all the hits so she wouldn't dent. "Tonight is special," she said, her voice strengthening, "because we are officially kicking off our seed funding round. We have big goals. We want to expand to New York and Los Angeles by next year. But to do that, we need capital. We need believers." She paused again. The room was silent. "And I am so moved," she said, a smile breaking through her tears, "because my very first major investor is here tonight. Someone who believes in me so much that she is willing to bet her entire future on my dream. My heart stopped. First major investor? I looked around. Who was she talking about? She has been a silent supporter for years, Aurora continued. And tonight, she is stepping into the light. Please join me in welcoming my mother. Sheila. The word mother finally came out of her mouth, but it didn't feel like a title. It felt like the trigger of a trap. Suddenly, a spotlight mounted on the ceiling swung around. It swept across the tables, table 10, table 20, table 30, until it hit the back corner near the kitchen doors. It hit me. The light was blinding white. I blinked, raising a hand to shield my eyes. I felt exposed, naked in my sapphire dress. Every head in the room turned. 300 people twisted in their chairs to look at the distant relative at the overflow table. Aurora beamed from the stage, pointing directly at me. Please give a round of applause for Sheila, who has generously pledged $150,000 from her retirement fund to launch Week's PR. The room erupted. People clapped. A few whistled. The intern next to me looked up from her phone, eyes wide. Wow, she mouthed. That's huge. I sat frozen. My blood turned to ice. $150,000. The number echoed in my head like a gunshot. $150,000. I didn't have $150,000 to give. I didn't have it to pledge. I barely had enough for the bus fare home. But then the horror of the realization washed over me. I did have it, but it wasn't cash. It wasn't in a checking account. It was my house. My small, paid-off bungalow on the outskirts of the city. The one asset I owned free and clear. The only thing standing between me and poverty in my old age. The house had appreciated over the last 20 years. If I sold it today after fees and taxes, I would walk away with roughly $150,000. She knew. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Aurora hadn't invited me because she missed me. She hadn't invited me to apologize. She had invited me because she had run a credit check. She or Julian had looked up public property records. They knew exactly what my home was worth. They knew it was my only safety net. This wasn't a gala. It was a shakedown. And she was doing it in a ball gown, in front of 300 witnesses, banking on the fact that I would be too embarrassed, too polite, and too desperate for her love to say no. She was counting on my shame. She thought I would sit there, smile, wave, and later quietly sign the papers to leverage my home because I wouldn't want to humiliate her in front of her rich friends. She was weaponizing my motherhood against me. She knew I had spent 20 years begging for a scrap of attention, and now she was selling that scrap for $150,000. Stand up, Sheila. Julian encouraged from the stage, clapping his hands. Take a bow. The spotlight was hot on my face. Sweat pricked at my hairline. My heart was racing so fast, I thought I might pass out. The pressure in the room was suffocating. 300 pairs of eyes were waiting for the happy, generous mother to stand up and accept the praise. I looked at Aurora. She was smiling, but her eyes were hard. It was a challenge. Do it, her eyes said. Do it if you want me back. This is the price of admission. I gripped the edge of the table. The linen tablecloth felt rough under my fingertips. I thought about the $400 shoes returned to sender. I thought about the $1,200 apartment deposit. I thought about the tooth I pulled to save $50. I realized then that she didn't just want my money. She wanted my survival. She was willing to leave me homeless in my 70s just to fund her expansion to New York. She wasn't asking for a loan. She was asking for a sacrifice she had no intention of honoring. The clapping started to fade, slightly, as people waited for me to stand. The silence was returning, But this time, it wasn't the silence of being ignored. It was the silence of anticipation. My legs felt like lead, but I pushed my chair back. It scraped loudly against the floor. The intern to my left pulled her chair in to let me out. I stood up. I stood in the blinding spotlight, my sapphire dress shimmering. I took a breath. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just stood there, looking across the vast ballroom, directly at the daughter who had sold me out. Aurora's smile faltered just a fraction. She expected the meek, grateful mother. She expected the woman who begged. She didn't know that the woman standing at table 42 had spent 20 years keeping a ledger. And tonight, the books were finally going to be balanced. I stood there in the blinding white light, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. But then, something strange happened. The panic didn't escalate. It didn't turn into tears or fainting. It just stopped. It was replaced by a clarity so sharp it felt like ice water running through my veins. In my years as a logistics manager, I learned how to spot a bad contract. I learned how to look at a shipping manifest and see where the numbers didn't add up. I was looking at my daughter, standing on that stage in her silver gown. And for the first time in 20 years, I didn't see my little girl. I didn't see the toddler I nursed through fevers or the teenager I helped with homework. I saw a bad business partner. I saw a woman who had calculated the exact value of my existence. She had done the math. To her, I wasn't a mother. I was a resource. I was an asset that had been sitting dormant for too long, and she had decided it was time to liquidate me. She didn't want a relationship. She wanted a transaction. She wanted to trade a plate of lukewarm chicken and a distant relative title for the roof over my head. The applause was still rippling through the room, but it was getting uneven. People were confused. They were waiting for me to walk to the stage. They were waiting for the tearful hug, the handover of the oversized check, the "mommy is so proud of you" moment. Julian was gesturing with his hand, a come-on-up motion that looked more like a command than an invitation. Aurora's smile was fixed, frozen in place like a porcelain mask. I moved, but I didn't move forward. I turned my body to the left. I turned my back on the stage. I turned my back on table 1. I turned my back on the daughter who thought $150,000 was a fair price for my dignity. I started walking toward the exit. The sound in the room changed instantly. The applause died a jagged death, replaced by the rustle of silk and the murmur of 300 confused people. Where is she going? Is she sick? Is she confused? I wasn't confused. I had never been more lucid in my life. I walked past table 42. The intern looked up at me, her mouth slightly open. I didn't look down. I kept my eyes fixed on the red exit sign glowing above the double doors. It was my lighthouse. Click, click, click. My cheap heels sounded like gunshots on the parquet floor. It was a long walk. The ballroom was huge, meant to intimidate, meant to make you feel small. But with every step I took away from her, I felt bigger. I felt the heavy wool blanket of silence lifting off my shoulders. I reached the double doors and pushed them open. The heavy wood swung shut behind me, cutting off the murmur of the crowd. The hallway was quiet and cool. The air smelled of floor wax instead of expensive perfume. I didn't stop. I walked toward the coat check, my hands trembling slightly, not from fear anymore, but from the adrenaline of finally saying no. "Sheila, wait." The voice came from behind me. It wasn't the sweet, tearful voice from the stage. It was sharp. It was the voice of a CEO whose merger just fell through. I didn't stop walking. I heard the rapid staccato of high heels running on marble. A hand grabbed my arm. Hard. I spun around. Aurora stood there, her chest heaving. Her face was flushed, her perfect hair slightly askew. The mask was gone. The distant relative pretense was gone. She looked furious. "What are you doing?" she hissed, looking back at the ballroom doors to make sure no one had followed us. "You are embarrassing me. Julian is watching. The investors are watching. Get back in there." I looked at her hand gripping my arm, the same arm she hadn't touched in 2 decades. I pulled it away, slowly, deliberately. "I'm leaving, Aurora," I said. My voice was quiet. It didn't echo. It just hung in the air between us. "You can't leave," she whispered, her eyes wide with panic and greed. "We announced it. It's already in the press release. You have the money, Mom." I checked. There it was. The confession. "You checked?" I asked. "Yes, I checked." She threw her hands up, exasperated, as if my privacy was a nuisance she had to work around. "I ran a title search on your house. It's paid off. The market value is $160. After closing costs, you have exactly $150. It's sitting there doing nothing. I need it for the seed round. It's a loan, Mom. God, why do you always have to be so difficult?" She looked at me with such entitlement, as if my home was simply a savings account she had forgotten to withdraw from. She didn't ask how I paid it off. She didn't ask what I would do if I sold it. Where would I live? Under a bridge? In a shelter? She didn't care. To her, my survival was optional. Her expansion to New York was mandatory. "I called you on every birthday," I said. It wasn't an argument. It was just a statement of fact. "I sent gifts. I paid for your first apartment deposit. I bought bonds when I couldn't afford a dentist." "Oh my God, stop keeping score," she snapped, rolling her eyes. "That was years ago. This is business. This is my future. Don't you want to help your family?" "Family?" I repeated the word. It tasted like ash in my mouth. "Yes, family. Families help each other. Families invest in each other." She took a step closer, trying to use her height to intimidate me. "Now you are going to walk back in there, you are going to smile, and you are going to wave. We can sign the papers tomorrow, but you are not going to ruin this night for me." I looked at this woman, this stranger in a silver dress, and I realized I had been mourning a ghost for 20 years. The daughter I loved, the one I tried to buy shoes for, the one I saved bonds for. She didn't exist. This person in front of me was a predator, and I was done being the prey. I straightened my spine. I looked her dead in the eye. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't let her see me bleed. "You didn't invite a mother," I said, my voice steady and lethal. "You invited a bank account." Aurora opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. "And that account is closed." Her mouth snapped shut. She looked stunned. For the first time in her life, the ATM had rejected her card. "Goodbye, Aurora," I said. I turned around and walked to the coat check counter. The attendant, a young girl who looked a little frightened by the scene she had just witnessed, handed me my worn wool coat without a word. I put it on over my $350 dress. I buttoned it up to my chin. Sheila just walked away from the toxicity. If you are cheering for her right now, share this video with a strong woman in your life who needs to know it's okay to say no. Sometimes walking away is the strongest thing you can do. I pushed through the revolving doors and stepped out into the Chicago night. The wind was still brutal, the hawk slicing through the streets, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel the cold. I felt hot with adrenaline. A line of taxis was waiting. I didn't look for a bus stop. I didn't count the change in my purse. I walked up to the first cab in the line and opened the door. "Where to, lady?" the driver asked, eyeing my fancy dress and my shabby coat. I gave him my address. I knew the fare would cost me my grocery money for the next 2 weeks. I knew I would be eating rice and beans. I knew I had burned the only bridge I had left with my child. But as the taxi pulled away from the curb, leaving the golden glow of the Palmer house behind, I didn't feel sadness. I looked out the window at the city blurring by. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cold air. It was the first breath of freedom I had taken in 20 years. I wasn't waiting for a call anymore. I wasn't waiting for a letter. The hope was dead, and its death was a relief. I was broke. I was alone. I was going home to a drafty apartment, but I still had my house. I still had my dignity. And most importantly, I finally had the truth. But as I sat in the back of that cab, watching the streetlights flick by, a new thought started to form in my mind. Aurora had checked my equity. She knew exactly what I was worth. And she had dismissed me as a distant relative until she needed cash. She thought I was nothing. She thought I was just a little old lady in Chicago who would fade away and die quietly, leaving her the house in the will anyway. I looked at my reflection in the taxi window. The dusty rose lipstick was still perfect. The eyes looking back at me weren't sad anymore. They were calculating. I am a logistics manager. I thought, I know how to move things. I know how to reorganize. And I know how to cut losses. By the time the taxi pulled up to my curb, I wasn't Sheila the victim anymore. I was Sheila the woman with a plan. I wasn't just going to close the account. I was going to close the whole bank. I was going to disappear so completely that even her expensive credit checks wouldn't find a trace of me. I paid the driver. I tipped him well. I walked up the steps to my apartment, took out my key, and unlocked the door. The silence inside greeted me. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was a blank canvas. I went to the kitchen drawer and pulled out a notebook. I sat down at the table, still in my coat. I didn't cry. I opened the notebook to a fresh page. It was time to balance the ledger. The morning after the gala, I woke up with a headache, but it wasn't from a hangover. It was from the sheer weight of what I had to do. I didn't spend the day crying in bed. I didn't call Aurora to ask why she had done it. I knew why. She wanted money, and I was just an obstacle in the way of her getting it. I made a cup of black coffee, sat down at my kitchen table, and opened the notebook I had started the night before. At the top of the page, I wrote one word: erasure. It sounds dramatic, like something from a spy movie. But for me, it was just logistics. I had spent 40 years managing supply chains. I knew how to move inventory. I knew how to cut losses. And right now, the inventory was me. Day one was about the asset, the house. I called a real estate agent I knew from the neighborhood, a woman named Patty, who could sell ice to a polar bear. Patty, I said, I need to sell. Cash offers only. I want a quick close. Sheila, are you sure? She asked, hearing the edge in my voice. The market is good, but if you wait. I don't have time to wait. I interrupted. List it today. Price it to move. By noon, the for sale sign was in the yard. By 5 p.m., I had 3 offers. I took the lowest one because they could close in 10 days. It was a cash offer from a flipper. I walked away with $145,000 after closing costs. It was $5,000 less than Aurora had calculated, but it was mine. Every single cent of it was mine. Day 2 was about the connection. I went to the phone store. The young man behind the counter looked at my old iPhone 8 with pity. Here for an upgrade, he asked. No, I said, I want to cancel my service. Are you switching carriers? We have a retention plan. I want to disconnect the number, I said firmly, permanently. That number, the one I had kept for 20 years, the one I memorized in case of emergencies, the one I whispered into voicemails that were never returned. Disconnecting it felt like cutting an umbilical cord. But when the clerk typed the command and said, "It's done," I didn't feel pain. I felt silence. Real silence. Not the waiting kind, but the finished kind. Day 3 was the most important. It was about identity. I went to the courthouse. I filled out the petition for a legal name change. The clerk looked at my paperwork. Reason for change? She asked, tapping her pen. I looked at the line. Usually people write marriage or divorce. I picked up the pen and wrote, fresh start. Sheila Bradford was the woman who begged. She was the woman who clipped coupons and was called a distant relative. I didn't want to be her anymore. I needed a name that sounded like armor, a name that sounded like money. I chose Victoria for victory. I chose sterling for value, silver, unbreakable. Victoria Sterling. When the judge banged the gavel granting the petition, Sheila Bradford ceased to exist. She was a file in a basement archive. Victoria Sterling walked out of that courthouse with a temporary paper ID and a terrifying sense of freedom. I didn't stay in Chicago. The wind was too cold, and the memories were too crowded on every corner. I needed a place that respected history, but demanded hard work. I chose Boston. I packed 2 suitcases. I left the furniture. I left the curtains. I left the photos of Aurora in the closet. Let the flipper deal with them. I took a one-way flight to Logan Airport. Boston was different. It smelled of salt water and old bricks. I rented a small, sleek apartment in the Seaport District. It wasn't cheap, but I had my equity. I had my seed money. Most people my age retire to Florida. They play bridge and complain about their hips. I didn't want to play bridge. I wanted to build something. I had spent my life managing logistics for other people, men who took the credit while I did the math. Why couldn't I do it for myself? I took $50,000 of my house money and registered a business, Sterling Logistics Solutions. It was a boutique consulting firm. My pitch was simple. I find the waste in your supply chain that you are too busy to see. The first 6 months were brutal. I was a 70-year-old woman walking into boardrooms full of 30-year-old tech bros in hoodies. They looked at me like I was someone's grandmother who got lost on the way to the knitting circle. But then I opened my mouth. I didn't use buzzwords. I used math. I showed them where they were bleeding money in shipping costs. I showed them how their inventory turnover was eating their profit margins. I saved my first client, a medical supply company, $200,000 in a single quarter. Word got around. The lady in the suit knows her stuff. I stopped dyeing my hair. The gray roots were too much maintenance, and honestly, I didn't have time for the salon. I let it grow out. It came in a striking, steely silver. I cut it into a sharp bob. It didn't look old. It looked formidable. I stopped buying clearance rack clothes. I went to a tailor on Newberry Street. I bought 3 suits. 1 charcoal, 1 navy, 1 black. They were fitted perfectly. When I walked into a room, the fabric didn't bunch or sag. I looked expensive. I looked like the CEO I was becoming. 3 years went by in a blur of spreadsheets and site visits. I worked 18-hour days. I woke up at 4 a.m. to check European markets. I went to bed at midnight after reviewing contracts. I didn't have time to be lonely. I didn't have time to check Facebook to see if Aurora had posted a picture of a sandwich. My business grew. I hired an assistant, then a junior analyst, then a team. We moved from my kitchen table to a real office overlooking the harbor. I became a force in the Boston business world. They called me the Iron Lady of Logistics. I liked it. Iron doesn't break. Iron doesn't beg. One morning, 3 years after leaving Chicago, I was standing in my office looking out at the water. My reflection in the glass was a stranger. Victoria Sterling stared back at me. Her eyes were clear. Her posture was perfect. She was wealthy. She was respected. Sheila Bradford was dead. But the past has a funny way of not staying buried. You can change your name, you can change your city, you can change your face, but you can't change the fact that you are a mother. And somewhere, hundreds of miles away, the daughter who broke you was about to come looking for a job. I didn't know it yet, but my two worlds were on a collision course. And this time, I wasn't the one who was going to crash. My office in the Seaport District has a wall made entirely of glass. From my desk, I can see the Boston Harbor, the steel gray water chopping against the docks, and the planes taking off from Logan Airport in the distance. It is a view that costs more a month than my entire house in Chicago used to cost in a year. I stood there, holding a cup of tea, Earl Grey, hot, in a bone china cup, watching a container ship navigate the channel. It was a massive vessel, carrying millions of dollars in cargo, moving slowly but with unstoppable momentum. I felt a kinship with that ship. I was 73 years old now. I didn't move fast. I didn't run around the office in a panic, but I carried weight. I had momentum, and nothing could stop me. My assistant, a sharp young man named David, knocked on the glass door. "Miss Sterling," he said, "do you have a moment?" I turned around. "I always have a moment for good news, David. Is it the quarterly report?" "Better," he said, walking in with a manila folder. "I think we found our shark." We had been looking for a new vice president of marketing for 2 months. My current VP was retiring to spend time with her grandchildren. Something I understood in theory, even if I no longer experienced it in practice. We needed someone to replace her, but I didn't want a caretaker. Sterling Logistics was expanding into pharmaceuticals. I needed someone hungry. I needed someone aggressive. I needed someone who knew how to spin a story and control a narrative. "Talk to me," I said, sitting down in my leather executive chair. It was ergonomic, expensive, and fit me perfectly. David opened the folder and placed a resume on my desk. Her name is perfect on paper. She's got 10 years of experience in high-stakes PR and crisis management. She's coming from Chicago, looking to relocate to Boston immediately. She says she wants a fresh challenge, but honestly, I think she's running from something. She's desperate, and desperate people work harder. Chicago, I repeated. The word didn't sting anymore, but it still had a texture to it. "Let me see." I picked up the resume. The paper was thick, high-quality linen stock. The font was elegant, professional. At the very top, in bold capital letters, was the name, Aurora Weeks. The world didn't stop spinning. The glass didn't shatter. The tea in my cup didn't ripple. I didn't gasp. I just sat there, staring at the letters. Aurora. It had been 3 years. 3 years since I walked out of the Palmer House Hilton in my dusty rose lipstick. 3 years since I cut the cord. I hadn't heard her name spoken aloud in 1,000 days. And now, here it was, sitting on my mahogany desk in Boston, applying for a job in the company I built from the ashes of the life she burned down. I felt a sensation I didn't expect. It wasn't fear. It wasn't love. It was a cold, clinical curiosity. It was the way a scientist looks at a bug under a microscope. "Miss Sterling," David asked, noticing my silence. "Do you know her? The industry is small." I looked up at him. My face was a mask of calm. "I knew of her," I said carefully. "In Chicago. She ran her own firm, didn't she? Weeks PR." "She did." David nodded. "But looking at her file, it seems the firm went under about 2 years ago. Dissolved. Bankruptcy." I looked back down at the resume. Under experience. It listed founder and CEO, Weeks PR, with an end date of 2023. So she failed. The thought didn't bring me joy. Exactly. It brought me a grim sense of validation. She had stood on that stage and told 300 people she was launching a seed round. She had tried to bully me out of $150,000 because she needed capital. I didn't give it to her. And without my money, without the legacy investment she felt entitled to, she couldn't make it work. She had tried to build a skyscraper on a foundation of sand, and when the sand shifted, when I walked away, the whole thing collapsed. Why is she applying for a VP role? I asked, my finger tracing the edge of the paper. If she was a CEO, this is a step down. Like I said, David replied, she's desperate. The cover letter says she is looking for stability. She's willing to take a pay cut. She just needs a foot in the door in Boston. Desperate. I remembered the look in her eyes in the hallway of the hotel. You have equity in that house. I checked. That was desperation, masked as arrogance. Now the mask was gone. She was broke, her business had failed, and she was applying for a job with a stranger in a city where nobody knew her name. She was exactly where I had been 3 years ago, starting over. But there was a difference. I started over with my own money, my own grit, and my own name. She was starting over because she had run out of people to use. She fits the profile, David continued, mistaking my silence for hesitation. She's aggressive. She's polished. Her references say she can sell ice to an Eskimo. Do you want me to bring her in for a screening? I leaned back in my chair and swiveled slightly to look at the harbor again. Fate is a funny thing. If I had stayed Sheila Bradford, I would probably be sitting in a nursing home right now, wondering why my daughter never visited. But I became Victoria Sterling. And because I became Victoria Sterling, I was now holding my daughter's future in my hands. She didn't know. There was no way she could know. Sterling Logistics was a generic name. Victoria Sterling was a name with no history. To Aurora, I was just another faceless CEO in a city full of them. A rich woman she could charm, impress, and eventually probably try to manipulate. I thought about just shredding the resume. I could tell David to pass. I could let her keep searching, keep struggling, keep wondering why the doors weren't opening. That would be the easy thing to do. It would be the safe thing to do. But I realized I didn't want safety. I wanted closure. I wanted to see her. I wanted to see what 3 years of failure had done to the woman who thought she was too good for her mother. I wanted to see if the shark could swim when she was in the tank with a real killer whale. I turned back to David. I picked up a pen and circled her name on the resume. No screening, I said. My voice was steady, professional. If she was a CEO, she won't appreciate being screened by HR. It's insulting. David looked surprised. You want to skip the first round? I want to bring her straight to the top, I said. Bring her in tomorrow at 10 a.m. Tell her the CEO has taken a personal interest in her application. Tell her I'm looking for someone resilient. You want to interview her yourself? Yes, I said, closing the folder. I'll conduct the final interview personally. David nodded, grabbed the folder, and headed for the door. I'll set it up. 10 a.m. tomorrow. When the door clicked shut, I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. My hands were trembling just a tiny bit. I placed them flat on the cool mahogany of my desk to steady them. Tomorrow, Aurora Weeks was going to walk into my office to sell herself to a rich stranger. She was going to put on her best suit, her best smile, and her best lies. She was going to try to charm the rich new boss. She had no idea that the boss already knew exactly what she was worth. I pulled open my desk drawer. Tucked in the back, underneath my checkbook and my passport, was a small, faded slip of paper I had kept as a souvenir. It was the receipt for a savings bond. $50. I took it out and placed it on top of the desk. See you tomorrow, Aurora, I thought. Don't be late. I opened my top drawer. My hand brushed against the cool wood inside. I pulled out a small, rectangular piece of paper. It was yellowed with age, the ink fading but still legible. It was a receipt from the United States Treasury, a Series E savings bond. $50. Dated November 1995. I placed it on the desk. I slid it across the mahogany surface until it rested right in front of her hands. Aurora looked down at it, confused. She squinted. I don't understand. Is this a test? Look at the name on the beneficiary line, I said. She leaned in, her brow furrowed. She read the name typed in the old dot matrix font. Aurora Weeks. Then she read the name on the purchaser line. Sheila Bradford. She froze. It wasn't a dramatic freeze like in the movies. It was total stillness. Her breath stopped. Her eyes stayed locked on the paper. Her brain was trying to process information that didn't make sense. Why does this CEO have a 30-year-old savings bond receipt with my name on it? She looked up at me. Her eyes searched my face, really searched it this time. She looked at my silver hair. She looked at my tailored suit. She looked at the expensive office. She couldn't find Sheila. Sheila was a frumpy woman in Chicago. Sheila was poor. Sheila was gone. I don't, she stammered. How do you have this? I didn't answer. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, crossing my legs. I dropped the CEO octave. I let the polish slide away. I looked at her with the weary, knowing eyes of the woman who had sat at table 42. You know, I said, my voice softer, intimately familiar. You invited me to the Palmer house. You put me in the spotlight. You asked for everything I had. Aurora's face went white. Not pale, white. All the blood drained out of her skin. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. I walked out. I continued, keeping my eyes locked on hers. I took a taxi home. It cost me $40. That was my grocery money for 2 weeks. I paused. You never did pay me back for the taxi ride, Aurora. The sound she made was strangled, like all the air had been punched out of her lungs. She gripped the arms of the chair, so hard her knuckles turned yellow. Mom. The word came out as a whisper, terrified and incredulous. Mom, she said again, louder this time. She stood up, her legs shaking, knocking the portfolio to the floor. No, it can't be. You're... I'm Victoria Sterling, I said coldly. Sheila Bradford was a resource you tried to liquidate. She doesn't exist anymore. Aurora looked around the room frantically, as if looking for a camera or a joke or an exit. Then she looked back at me, her eyes filling with tears. But I knew Aurora's tears. I had seen them on the stage. You changed your name, she whispered. You became this? You're the CEO. I am. But how? She put a hand to her chest. We looked for you. Christopher looked for you. The lawyers said you vanished. I did vanish, I said. I vanished from the life where I was a doormat, and I built a life where I am the boss. She looked at me, and I saw the gears turning. I saw the shock fade, replaced by something else. Calculation. She looked at the office. She looked at the view. She looked at the suit. She realized that the mother she had tried to rob for $150,000 was now worth millions. Mom, she said, taking a step toward the desk. Her voice shifted. It became the voice she used when she wanted something. Soft, ingratiating. Mom, look at you. You're incredible. I knew you had it in you. I always knew you were smart. She reached out a hand across the desk. I've missed you so much, she lied. I've been so worried. I looked at her hand. It was shaking. Sit down, Aurora, I said. Mom, please, we can. I said sit down. The command cracked like a whip. She sat. She looked small in the chair now. The power dynamic had shifted, so completely the room felt tilted. This is an interview, I said, and you are failing. You learn a lot about a person when you tell them no. Most people accept it. Some people get angry. But predators just look for a different angle. They look for a weakness in the fence. I watched Aurora's face. The shock of realizing her mother was the CEO was fading, replaced by that familiar, calculating look I had seen at the Palmer house 3 years ago. She looked around my office again. She took in the view of the harbor, the expensive leather chairs, the quiet hum of power. She didn't see a mother. She saw an opportunity. She wiped her eyes, smearing her mascara slightly, and forced a smile onto her face. It was shaky, but it was there. "Mom," she said, her voice gaining a little strength. "Okay. Wow. This is a lot to process. You reinvented yourself. That's amazing. Honestly, it's inspiring." She leaned forward, resting her elbows on my desk, encroaching on my space. "But think about it," she said, the PR spin doctor coming out. "This is perfect. Who knows you better than I do? I know your story. I know where you came from. We can use this. The mother-daughter dynasty. The press would eat it up. I can run marketing for you. I can rebrand the whole firm. We can take this national together." I stared at her. I almost admired the audacity. She had just found out I had erased my identity to escape her greed, and within 60 seconds, she was pitching me a marketing campaign. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't ashamed. She was just trying to figure out how to monetize our reunion. "You want to run marketing?" I asked calmly. "Yes." She nodded eagerly, thinking she had hooked me. "I'm broke, Mom. I'll be honest. Chicago chewed me up. But I'm hungry. And now that I know you're the one running the show, we can fix this. We can be a team. I can help you." "Help me?" I picked up the resume she had lied on. "You lied about your experience. You lied about your mentors. You lied about your integrity. Everybody embellishes," she argued, waving a hand. "That's just business." "No," I said, "that's fraud." I stood up. I walked over to the glass wall and looked out at the city. I didn't want to look at her anymore. It was too painful to see how little she had changed. "I built this company on trust, Aurora," I said to the window. "My clients trust me with millions of dollars of inventory because they know I tell the truth, even when it's bad news, especially when it's bad news." I turned back to face her. "I don't hire people with character flaws, Ms. Weeks, and I certainly don't hire family who only show up when the valuation is high." The room went dead silent. The words hit her like a physical slap. The hope in her eyes died, replaced by a flash of that old, familiar anger. "So that's it," she snapped, the mask slipping completely. "You're going to punish me? You're going to let your own daughter starve because of a grudge? You're sitting on millions of dollars, and you won't help me?" "I helped you for 20 years," I said softly. "I helped you until I had nothing left to give but my house. And you tried to take that, too." I reached over and pressed the intercom button on my phone. "David?" "Yes, Miss Sterling?" "Please come in. The interview is over." Aurora stood up, her face red. "You can't do this. You can't just kick me out." "I can," I said. "It's my building." David opened the door. He looked from me to Aurora, sensing the tension. He was a professional. He didn't ask questions. "Ms. Weeks," David said, gesturing to the door. "Right this way." Aurora looked at me one last time. She opened her mouth to scream, to beg, to threaten, I don't know which, but she looked at my face, and she saw the Iron Lady. She saw Victoria Sterling, and she knew that Sheila Bradford wasn't there to listen. She snapped her portfolio shut, turned on her heel, and walked out. I didn't sit down. I walked to the glass. My office is on the 12th floor. It offers a perfect view of the front entrance of the building. I waited. 1 minute, 2 minutes. Then I saw her. A small figure in a black suit emerged onto the gray sidewalk. The Boston wind whipped her hair across her face. She stopped. She looked up. I knew she couldn't see me through the reflective glass. To her, the building was just a giant mirror reflecting the city. But she looked up anyway, searching for the 12th floor, searching for the mother she had thrown away. She stood there for a long moment, shivering in the cold. Then, she pulled her collar up, turned her head, and walked away down the street. She disappeared into the crowd of strangers, just another person looking for a break in a city that didn't know her name. I watched her go until I couldn't distinguish her from the rest of the world. A part of me, the Sheila part, wanted to cry. That was my baby down there. That was the girl I had rocked to sleep. But the Victoria part, the part that had survived, knew the truth. I hadn't abandoned her. I had saved myself. I had chosen dignity over a relationship that was killing me. I had balanced the ledger. I turned my back on the window. I walked over to my desk. I picked up the $50 savings bond receipt and the resume. I walked to the shredder in the corner of the room. I fed the resume in first. It whirred and turned the lies into confetti. Then I fed the receipt, the last piece of Sheila Bradford, the last debt. I watched the paper disappear. The silence in the office wasn't heavy anymore. It was light. It was clean. It was mine. I sat down in my leather chair, pulled a fresh stack of shipping contracts toward me, and picked up my pen. I had work to do. Victoria chose her dignity over her daughter. Was she too harsh, or was it justice? Would you have hired her back, or would you have called security? Comment Team Victoria if you would have done the same thing. Comment Team Mercy if you think she should have given her a second chance. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for more stories of women finding their strength. See you in the next video.